Joining us now, staff writer for The Atlantic, Caitlin Dickerson, former Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism and Threat Prevention at DHS, Samantha Vinograd, and former U.S. Attorney, and MSNBC legal analyst Barbara McQuaid. So, Caitlin, you're reporting on that broad definition of what it means to be in violation of this executive order. How can that be used now?
The story that I wrote looks at this expansion on behalf of the administration, going after not just immigrants who Trump clearly articulated in running for office he wanted to deport en masse, but really anyone standing up to defend them. And I feel like I just have to start this conversation by acknowledging how disturbing it is to watch the video that you just showed us, in particular when you point out that one of those arrests, at least one of those arrests, was of a United States citizen. And those aggressive tactics I found in my reporting are also being turned on people who are, in a completely democratic way, trying to make sure that people are able to access their full legal rights. So I interviewed groups on the ground who are filming, and I want to point out they're a little different from the ones we just looked at. There are groups that are filming ICE agents making arrests to hand the footage over to people's lawyers. They're not posting it online, and they're not trying to intervene in arrests or trying to stop them in any way. One of these groups is called Organized Communities Against Deportation in Chicago. And despite the kind of careful precautions that they're taking in doing their work, they've had people tailed in their cars by ICE officers, people who had legal status, like the woman we just saw, temporarily detained, even though they were, either U.S. citizens or legal permanent residents. People doing similar work have been thrown to the ground. Obviously, there was footage people saw of a clergyman being hit in the head in Chicago with a pepper bullet. So, this violence and these attacks are spreading, and they're also impacting lawyers from mainstream immigrants' rights groups, people who've spent lots of time on the Hill. Those groups are facing the threat of losing access to public loan forgiveness, like you pointed out in the image you showed earlier. Also, the Trump's Justice Department has tried to levy financial sanctions against lawyers, levied congressional inquiries against them, demanding their records, saying that they're part of terrorist groups and that they're funding violent riots. So there's just this rapidly expanding definition of what is permissible. And it's becoming increasingly apparent that any opposition to the administration at all could land you in a situation like
I think we just lost Caitlin. You're frozen. Hopefully we get you back. But it's like a constricting definition of what is actually permissible and a constricting definition of what the First Amendment actually protects. In fact, here's what DHS is now saying in response to these claims of peaceful protests in Chicago. DHS says the First Amendment protects speech and peaceful assembly, not rioting. DHS is taking reasonable and constitutional measures to uphold the rule of law and protect our officers. ICE officers are facing a nearly 1,000% increase in assaults against them as they put their lives on the line to arrest murderers, rapists, and gang members. But Sam, I didn't see a murderer or a rapist or a gang member in the videos that we just showed. I haven't seen allegations that the woman up top who was pulled from her car was a murderer, a rapist, or a gang member. How is it different at DHS today than it was when you were there?
Well, under any Department of Homeland Security, any secretary, Katie, there are both laws as well as policies that govern the tactics that immigration enforcement officers may use when conducting an immigration enforcement action. Joyce will likely talk about the legal aspects of this, but from a policy perspective, the secretary, the ICE director set internal policies on what de-escalation tactics may be used in particular circumstances and what use of force may be used in particular circumstances based upon the threat that is assessed when engaging in an immigration enforcement action. These sorts of cases have gone to the Supreme Court before, and the Supreme Court has ruled most recently this year that the use of force by law enforcement agents must be objectively reasonable based on the totality of circumstances in any particular case. When I was at DHS, certainly immigration agents, when apprehending an unarmed female, used one set of tactics versus going on an immigration enforcement raid against a suspected terrorist or cartel member. So I think there's certainly the likelihood that internal guidance has changed, internal policies have changed, and I think it is very probable that some of these cases may make their way up to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, what about the legal pushback here? How, Joyce, do you fight this if DHS is claiming you're rioting or you're obstructing? And Barb, excuse me, and the video shows that you're being pulled from your car forcibly. What legal recourse do you have?
Well, certainly in that situation, a person has the ability to file a civil lawsuit against the officer. That's where masking and the failure to wear insignias can become very problematic, because it can be difficult for a person to know and identify the person who has violated their rights. But there is the ability to file a civil rights lawsuit if somebody is violating your civil rights through an illegal seizure. One of the challenges we've seen in recent years is qualified immunity that applies to officers when they are exercising their official duties, and you have to show that they were violating a known legal right. That can get tricky in a situation where tensions are escalating, and it becomes more difficult to show that they act in bad faith. I think, Katie, one of the biggest concerns I have about what's happening now is we are hiring up ICE agents very quickly because they want to increase the ranks. We've got people trained to do certain kinds of law enforcement activities, not crowd control activities. And we're throwing agents in situations they're ill-equipped to handle. And so it's really not surprising that we are seeing these incidents escalate. Certainly, no one has a right to obstruct or impede a federal agent in his work. But unless we have agents who are carefully trained to de-escalate, show a lot of patience, and a lot of calmness under these situations, I think it's inevitable that we're going to see these kinds of conflicts because of this effort to create a show of force in American cities. Do
you see any way to legally defend what we saw in Chicago with the pastor who got shot with a pepper bullet? He was standing on the side of a building praying. Here it is. You can see him right there. He just got hit in the face, in the head with a pepper bullet. Is there any legal defense of that?
No, I mean, I think that video is something everybody has seen. He is using words. He is trying to plead with ICE agents. He is offering no threat. I can't imagine that there can be any legal defense for what they did in that situation. I mean, in some ways, officers have to have thick skins. If someone's talking at you and you don't want to hear what they have to say, you close your ears, unless they are in any way inhibiting what you're trying to do. But they're standing on a roof overseeing a group of people on the ground, and he's expressing his views in a peaceful way. I don't see how there's any legal way to defend what happened in that situation.
Doesn't even look like that many people there. So, Peter Baker, I'll put up some polling on Donald Trump's handling of immigration. Here's a New York Times Siena poll on the Trump handling of immigration. Let's put it up so I can see the numbers, because I don't have them on my sheet. Okay, so handling somewhat or strongly approve, 47%, strongly somewhat disapprove, 52%. Gone too far is next, 51% of the country say that Donald Trump's immigration enforcement actions have gone too far. How does the White House feel about this? We had Leanne Caldwell on from Puck the other day saying that there is some concern and discomfort among Republicans on Capitol Hill over the extent to which they are enforcing immigration.
Yeah, I think that a lot of Americans voted for Donald Trump because they did think he was going to be tough on immigration, and they support his actions at the border, where he's basically done a lot to shut down the flow of people coming into the country illegally. That gets a lot of support if you ask that question in polling. I think what a lot of Americans are surprised by or shocked by or upset about are some of the pictures you're showing, right? That the idea that it's not just about murderers and rapists and criminals, but about, everyday people who are trying trying to make a living. They may be here illegally and therefore subject to deportation. But a lot of people are discovering that there are people in their communities that they know who have been affected, who they didn't think of as being criminals, or didn't think of as being murderers and gang members and all that. So I think the distinction between controlling the border, which Trump has been successful, it looks like, at doing so far, and these, very drastic images that are being, recorded now and populated not just television but social media, there's a difference there, and that seemed to be more of a political liability, because this is supposed to be his strong point. Immigration is supposed to be historically been one of the areas where he has been most popular with the public.
All right, Peter Baker, thank you very much. Caitlin Dickerson, thank you as well. Barbara McQuaid, I appreciate it, along with Sam Vinograd.